Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about this Super Pac-Man Partycade from Arcade1UP. Just as the Arcade1UP 3/4 scale cabinets have improved with each iteration, so have the Arcade1UP Partycades. This includes better artwork, a better screen, and more games on the Partycade itself. In this video, I'm going to do a breakdown of the Partycade, including an overview of the Partycade and the components that are used in the build. During the breakdown, I will point out potential modding opportunities and also give advice on moving the components to operate on a 3/4 scale Arcade1UP cabinet. The following are the specifications for the Super Pac-Man Partycade. The unit is age graded for individuals 14 and up. The box dimensions that it ships in are approximately 23 inches by 11 inches by 33 inches. The assembled dimensions are 18.5 inches by 7.69 inches by 28.81 inches. The inbox weight is around 33.33 pounds, while the unit weight is approximately 27.5 pounds. And the power supply uses the typical AC DC power supply, which is 12 volt 3 amps. As for the features of the Pac-Man Partycade, it's pre-assembled, meaning it's ready to play out of box. It is a 3-in-1 design. It can be wall mounted, you can hang it on a door, or you can set it on a tabletop. A fourth option is to take the components out of the Partycade and put them into an Arcade1UP 3/4 scale cabinet as well. A new feature to the Partycades is the inclusion of a light up marquee. The Super Pac-Man Partycade also comes with 10 games in one, which include the marquee game, which is Super Pac-Man, Pac-Man, Pac-Land, Pac-Mania, Dig Dug, Dig Dug 2, Mappy, New Rally X, Rompers, and Rolling Thunder. There are also game setting options for each game. The unit also includes a 17-inch color LCD screen, which is typical with all Arcade1UP Partycades and 3/4 scale cabinets. These Partycades also include stereo speakers instead of a single mono speaker, and of course they come with the Arcade1UP arcade controls. So this is the unit out of the box. I've already taken off the protective film. So as you peel off the protective film, you'll notice that as you're peeling it off, the screws may impede it from being peeled off cleanly. So to make sure that all the film is removed successfully, you may want to take the screws out of the bezel to pull the film off. The bezel is held with 6 screws, 3 on the left, 3 on the right. So you would just unscrew those screws and then peel the film off. Now on the control panel, there's 2 screws, one on the left, one on the right. You would just unscrew those and then take off the plexi protective panel and then peel the film off that as well. And once the film is peeled off, then just replace the screws on the bezel and on the control panel itself. Now as far as the units look, the artwork is what you expect from Arcade1UP. It looks very good. It complements the cabinet very well. The artwork just pops. And in my opinion, even when you consider all the Pac-Man releases, including the 3/4 scales, the Super Pac-Man artwork has always been my favorite. I just love the color scheme, and I'm just happy to see it in a Partycade. Below the control panel, you'll see there's additional artwork, and you see where the stereo speakers are located on the left and the right. The side art is simple but effective. It's just simply one color with the Super Pac-Man logo embraced on the side of it, and the same goes on the right side as well. So all in all, it's a good looking cabinet as far as the artwork goes. So with that said, let's go ahead and do a breakdown of the components, starting with the light up marquee. So as we turn on the marquee, you're going to notice something right off the bat. So you'll notice that the light is brighter around the Super Pac-Man graphic, and the light on the left and right side are a little darker. This may be because of the LED lights that are used in these. But other than that, the marquee looks great. Now, in this photo, it looks like it's too bright and it may look a little washed out, but in person it does not look like that. It looks well, the colors pop, and overall it's a good looking marquee. Now as we zoom in to the graphic, I can tell that there's a little bit of fuzziness to the graphic, but you have to zoom up really close to see it. And I don't even know if you can really tell on this video, but it does look a little fuzzy. But again, you would have to go up real close to it to see it. Other than that, when you pull out and you're looking at it, normally the marquee is very impressive and looks very good for an Arcade 1UP cabinet. So I pulled out the marquee to get a better understanding of how it was built. Now, most of the 3/4 scale Arcade 1UP cabinets use a light box for the light up marquee. And then the actual marquee is actually like a sticker that's stuck on that light box to give it that marquee look. However, that's not the case for the Super Pac-Man Partycade. The marquee image is reverse screen printed on a piece of plexiglass. The plexiglass is held together by two wood panels that are connected together by two wood dowels. The back of the wood panel has an LED strip on the back of it that illuminates the marquee when it's powered on. The top and the bottom of the wood panels have routed slots, which allows the marquee to slide into and held in place by the wood panels. Now, as you can see in this video, I'm having a hard time getting it to hold in place. This is because the wood panels are only held together by those two wood dowels right now. When this is properly in the Partycade, it is held in place by the two white brackets below and also by the machine screws that screw into the side of the Partycade. So as you can see, once I hold it together properly, the marquee just slides in place and everything looks good. Now, I suspected that this was going to be done this way because they did the same thing with the Street Fighter II Partycade. It has the same type of marquee. So I'm glad that Arcade 1UP decided to continue on with the marquees this way with the Partycades. So you may have bought this Partycade to transfer the components and everything to a 3/4 scale Arcade 1UP cabinet. So the question you may be having is, can I transfer this light up marquee to one of those 3/4 scale cabinets? And the answer is it's not going to be easily done. So on the left is the marquee from the Partycade. The top is the wood encasing, and then the bottom is the piece of plexi. And on the right we have a light box that's from an Arcade 1UP 3/4 scale cabinet. Now the light box on the right, which comes from the 3/4 scale Arcade 1UP cabinet, the width is 17 3/4 of an inch, and the height of that is 5 1/8 of an inch. Whereas the Partycade, although the plexiglass is 17 3/4 of an inch in width, the height is 4 6/16 of an inch. However, the wood encasing for the Partycade marquee is 17 1/2 inches in width, and the height is 5 1/8 of an inch. So you're probably wondering why the width of the marquee plexiglass is longer than the wood encasing for the marquee for the Partycade. And the reason for this is because when the marquee is securely in place in the Partycade, on the side of the panel there is a thin routed slot where the marquee slips in. So, and that's on both sides of the Partycade cabinet. So because the plexiglass goes into those routed slots on each side of the panels, the plexiglass is longer so that it can fit snugly into the Partycade. And because the width of the marquee wood enclosure for the Partycade is 1/4 inch smaller than the standard 3/4 scale Arcade 1UP cabinet marquee, it's not going to fit in there. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. So this is the wood enclosure for the marquee for the Partycade, and I got it in a Arcade 1UP 3/4 scale Generation 1 cabinet. Now the wood dowels on the side of the marquee wood enclosure for the Partycade line up on the Arcade 1UP Generation 1 cabinet. However, there's no screw hole on the panel to where it can be screwed down onto the Arcade 1UP cabinet. You'll also notice that it comes out a lot more from the front than the Arcade 1UP light box does. And then over to the right, you'll notice that the dowels are showing, and that's because the shorter length of the marquee wood enclosure for the Partycade is that 1/4 of an inch shorter, so those dowels can't be lined up properly so it doesn't lock in place. Now, this doesn't mean it can't be done. I mean, if you put a little bit of work into it, you probably could get it to fit. Maybe get a quarter-inch dowel to extend it a little bit so it fits in or something of that nature. But by default, it's not going to fit, and it may be more trouble than what it's worth to try to get it to fit. You may still want to buy a third-party marquee, light-up marquee to put in your cabinet once you move everything over. So next we'll do a breakdown of the monitor that's included with the Super Pac-Man Partycade. Now the orientation, of course, is vertical, and this is the BOE brand monitor. The panel model is DV170YGZ-N10. Now this is the brand monitor that Arcade1Up uses in their Generation 2 or greater 3/4 scale arcade cabinets. And it looks like it's the monitor that they'll use going forward with the Partycades. In the past, the Partycade LCD displays have varied, with the very first Partycades being the 1280 by 1024 monitors, and even some of the older Partycades being a resolution of 1024 by 768. But going forward, it looks like Arcade1Up is going to start using this monitor in the Partycades as well. Now, some other information on here. It is, of course, a 17-inch monitor with a resolution of 1280 by 960. Frequency is 60 hertz, and it's still using that LVDS 2-channel 8-bit 30-pin connection. And as is standard with all Arcade1Up cabinets, you cannot control the brightness or the contrast on these LCD displays. That is set by Arcade1Up or the company that does the emulation. They set the brightness and the contrast, and there is no way for you to control that. One other specification I should mention is that the aspect ratio of the monitor is 4:3, or in the case because it's vertical is 3:4 ratio. Okay, so here's the monitor in action on the Super Pac-Man Partycade. As you can see, you see a glare, and that's from the plexi bezel. But as you can see, the colors look good. The blackness level looks good on the Super Pac-Man. And as we go to the left here, you can see it's got a pretty good viewing angle. Nothing's really washed out. I can still see everything on this extreme viewing angle to the left. And when I go to the right, you'll see the same thing. So everything looks good, and if we go into the top, it's going to do the same thing. The viewing angle looks good. And overall, the monitor is good. These monitors have been performing well for Arcade1Up, and I'm glad to see that they're being used in the Partycades, and going forward, hopefully they'll continue using them. So next we'll go ahead and we'll talk about the speakers. Nothing really to discuss here, other than the fact that these newer Partycades look like they're using stereo speakers now instead of single mono speakers. They're typically the same speakers that you see in Arcade1Up 3/4 scale cabinets. They're 3-watt 8-ohm speakers, and they're pressed against the speaker panel, which is 1/2 inch thick, and they have holes in there to allow the sound to come out of the speakers. So I'm going to turn on the Partycade now, and we're going to listen to the sound. As of now, I have the volume turned up all the way, and we'll listen to the Arcade1Up logo. Now, to me, it seems like the sound is a little muffled. Not a whole lot, but just a little. And of course, that may be because the speakers are pressed against the 1/2 inch panel for the sound. But let's go into a game and listen to the sound and see what happens. Now, when I go into the game, I'm going to increase and decrease the volume just so you can get a sense of the volume levels. So in Pac-Man, the sound didn't seem to be muffled, so maybe the Arcade1Up logo just has a poor sound sample with it. So it seems to be okay. for the speakers that are in there. Now, when I turned the volume up and down, it seemed to be okay. It wasn't too low at one end, it wasn't too high at one end, so the volume levels seem to be okay. But let's go ahead and try another game and see how that goes. So in Rolling Thunder, it sounded okay to me as well. I didn't notice any muffling, or at least as bad as when the Arcade 1UP logo came up. So again, it may just be that Arcade 1UP logo, the music or sound with it, the sound sample may just not be very good. But it's nice that Arcade 1UP is now releasing stereo speakers with their Partycades. Now, a lot of these games on this unit may not utilize stereo. Well, they utilize stereo, but they're mostly mono games at the time. But newer Partycades like the Street Fighter games use stereo. So, again, it's good that Arcade 1UP is now providing stereo speakers with these units. And as for the sound quality, again, it seemed like it was a little muffled when the Arcade 1UP logo came on when it turned on. But as far as in gameplay, I don't seem to notice that. And for the speakers that are in here, they do the job. And as for the volume control seems to be working as it should. When I put it midway, the volume seems to be fine. It doesn't seem to be overly loud. The adjustments when I put it all the way down to 0 to when I put it all the way up to 15. So the sound seems to be good, and I'd give it a thumbs up. Everything seems to be functioning correctly. As for the control panel for the Arcade 1UP Super Pac-Man Partycade, it's your typical control panel that comes from Arcade 1UP. You have your standard layout here for this particular game. You have 3 action buttons on the right and 1 action button on the left. Above the 3 action buttons, you have your player 1 and player 2 buttons. And then in the middle of the top, you have your standard on-off switch and your volume switch. The volume switch being a monetary switch and the on-off being I guess you'd call a static switch, which just goes on and off. Of the 3 buttons up to the right, the first button is what's called the A button. This is the button that's used to start games from the main menu. It's also used to save settings when you go into the game settings as well. So if we look at the bottom of the control panel, we can see that it's using a 4-way gate. So the joystick will only move up, down, left, right. For this system, this would be the correct gate to use, as most of the games use 4-way joysticks, with the exception of Mappy, which only uses left, right, and Pac-Man, which doesn't use the joystick at all and would only use the 3 action buttons on the right side of the control panel. Physically, the buttons and the joystick operate just fine. You'll notice these are San Juan clones, so the buttons don't have loud micro switches in them, but the joystick does. So as you see when I'm moving it back and forth, the micro switches are pretty loud when you click. And if you look at the top here, you have your on-off switch and your volume switch, and then you have your player 1 and 2 buttons. The controls do their job. They operate just fine. If you go into a game, you'll be able to play the game just fine with these controls. So in my personal opinion, I think the buttons are a little mushy, and I usually try to replace them with hap style buttons with micro switches that are clicky. I just like hearing the click when I press the button. Also, the joystick doesn't have a short enough throw, meaning that it seems kind of loose when I move left, right, up, or down. So I'll usually replace the joystick with a hap style competition joystick, or I'll replace the tension spring and increase the pound spring that's in there. So for example, I'll either put like a 2 pound or 4 pound spring in there to give it a little bit more tension, so it's a little bit more tighter when you're moving the joystick around. But that's just my opinion on the buttons and the joysticks. Uh, Joysticks and buttons are subjective, so what I think may not work well, another person may think it works fine. But in general, although I replace the buttons and the joysticks at times, the buttons and the joysticks that are used in the Arcade 1-Up function just fine. And the good thing about the Arcade 1-Ups is that you can replace the buttons and the joysticks, and it's relatively easy to do. So, in conclusion about the buttons and the joysticks, they function, they work, but you have the option to upgrade if you don't like the way they operate. So if you feel you want to mod the controls, it's fairly simple to get the control panel out of here to do that. So on the left and right side, there's two machine screws that hold the control panel in place. Two on the right and two on the left. So what you need to do to get that control panel out is we need to unscrew those screws. So what you want to do is you don't want to take the screws out all the way. You just want to unscrew them enough so that the head of the screw comes out. The reason why you don't want to take it out completely is because if you take all the screws out, the control panel is going to fall out or fall into the unit, and it's so we just want to loosen the screws enough to where we can get them so we can remove them by hand. Okay, so now that all of the screws are loosened, we want to hold the top of the joystick, because once we remove all four of these screws again, if we're not holding the joystick, it's just going to fall into the unit. So just using your fingers, just unscrew the screws and then pull them out, and do that for this side, and then you'll do that for the right side as well. And once you loosen that final screw, the control panel will be loosened, and since you're holding the joystick, you can just pull it out and just unplug the ribbon cable from the encoder board, and you can now easily replace the buttons and the joystick if you wish. So when replacing the controls for the Partycade, you also have to make sure you have enough room for those controls to fit. And with the Partycade, you have limited space to put the controls in. Unlike the 3/4 scale Arcade 1-Up cabinets, where you have a whole lot of room and a whole lot of space to kind of put these controls, again, the Partycade is very limited. So this is the top view of the Partycade with the control panel out. So as you can see, again, you have very limited space. Now for the width, you have 17.5 inches to work with, and for the height, you have 4 and 10/16 of an inch. However, in some cases you have to account for the speaker. The speaker comes out about 1 1/8 of an inch. So if you have any controls that are in the way of the speaker, then you only have about 3 8/16 of an inch for room to put controls in. Now this is going to come into play if you look at the control panel. It's really only going to affect action buttons on the right side of the control panel. So if you remember, you have 3 buttons. You have the A button, then you have the middle button, and then you have the right button. The middle and the right button would be the ones that would be affected by the speaker. So you have to make sure that if you put a longer stem button in there, that you measure it to make sure that there's clearance between the control panel and the speaker. Now, a way around this is to use, if you want to use HAP buttons, is to get the short stem buttons, as that may have clearance with the speaker. So this is another angle of the Partycade with the control panel out. As you can see, I put a ruler in there to show the depth of how much space you have as far as depth goes. And for my measurement, you have about 4.5 inches in depth for your controls. So again, taking that into account for the width and the height and then the depth, you're just going to have to measure to make sure that any controls you put in there are going to fit and they're not going to interfere with the speakers or the back of the bezel. And Again, the best thing to do is to use short stem buttons. You may be able to get a half joystick in here, but again, I can't stress it enough. You're just gonna have to make sure you measure and make sure all the components will fit on that Partycade control panel, as space is limited to the amount of controls you can fit in here. So since we're talking about the control panel and changing out controls, it seems only fitting that we talk about the encoder board that is with the Arcade 1UP Partycade Super Pac-Man. So all the control panel components, joysticks, buttons, the power, volume, all plug into the encoder board. Then from the encoder board there to the PCB, there's a 12-pin ribbon cable, and this allows the encoder board to communicate with the PCB and know which buttons and which joystick movement determines if the power is turned on and off and things of that nature. So in most cases, Arcade 1UP will use a similar encoder board for all their cabinets, whether it be a Partycade or whether it be a 3/4 scale cabinet. So they always have it in this format. For example, if you were to look at a Street Fighter Legacy encoder, you would see that it looks pretty much the same. The only difference is that for each particular cabinet, the where the controls plug in, only the controls that are being used are populated. So if this was a Capcom Street Fighter Legacy PCB, the G2 components would be populated to where you could plug in controls, as would the G1Z and G1X, as those are the buttons, and then you have the joysticks as well. The only ones that wouldn't be populated would be the trackball and the speaker, because they don't use a mono speaker and it doesn't use a trackball. So again, the encoder Arcade 1UP only populates the controls on the encoder that are going to be used. Now you also notice that there's this yellow stuff on here. That's glue. Arcade 1UP loves their glue, and they put it on there to hold these wires in place. It took me about anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to get these controls unplugged because of all the glue that was on there. I had to get a little putty knife or a little razor blade, and I had to just kind of cut around the glue so I could get them unplugged. So just keep in mind, if you are changing out controls on the encoder board, just make sure you know that Arcade 1UP glues these down pretty good. So you're going to have to get, I said a putty knife, I meant an X-Acto knife, to kind of get these controls out because they're glued in so tightly. So with that being said, these are the controls that are populated on the encoder for the Super Pac-Man Partycade. First off, starting on the left, you have the power, where the power plugs in. Then over to the right of that is the volume, where the volume plugs in. And then going over to the right, you have two populated spots, one above each other. One says G2 start, and one below that is G1 start. Those are the start buttons. G1 indicates gamer 1 or player 1, and G2 is for gamer 2 or player 2. Now over to the right of that, you have 4 places that are populated. Starting from the top left, it's G1B, and to the right of that is G1A. And if you go down one, you'll have G1Y and then G1C. Those are the buttons that are used. G1C being the A button that is on the controller. And then to the right of that, you have 2 more 4-pin connectors. The first one being G1 right left, which is for the joystick right and left, and then G1 down up, which is the last one, which is for the controls for the joystick going down and up. Now, if I hadn't mentioned it already, G1 is for gamer 1, G2 is for gamer 2 or player 1 or player 2. Now, the reason why gamer 2 is not populated is because the games on the Super Pac-Man Partycade are alternating players. So essentially, they all use the same control. So player 1 will play, and then once their turn's done, then player 2 will use the same controls. So in this case, that's why you only have player 1 controls on the encoder that are populated. So in this graphic, we're going to talk about how the encoder board is connected to the controls on the control panel. So on the top is a representation of the encoder board, with everything being in yellow indicates what's populated on the Super Pac-Man Partycade encoder. The graphic below that represents the control panel for the Super Pac-Man Partycade that's being used. So obviously the power is connected from the control panel to the power on the encoder board, and the same goes for the volume from the control panel to the volume on the encoder board. And then the player 1 button will connect to the G1 start on the encoder board, and the player 2 start button will connect to the G2 start on the encoder board. And then which brings us to the action buttons and the joystick. So of course the joystick, the right and left, will connect to G1 right left on the encoder board, and the up and down on the joystick will connect to the G1 down and up on the encoder board as well. As for the action buttons, if we start over on the left side, that button is going to connect to G1B on the encoder board. And then we look at the action buttons that are on the right side, starting with the first one on the left. That first button is connected to G1C on the encoder board and also represents the A button that you'll use to select a game in the menu and to exit game option settings. And then the middle button on the control panel will connect to G1-Y on the encoder board, and then finally the right action button will connect to G1-A on the encoder board. So now you have an idea. When you update your controls, you can use this as a guide to make sure you plug the buttons and the joysticks and everything else in the correct places on the encoder board. So now we'll talk about the PCB that's in the Super Pac-Man Partycade. The PCB is the computer that's inside the Partycade. So if you look at the image on the images on the left, you start from the top to the bottom. The first image is the top of the casing that houses the PCB. The second image is the PCB that's inside the metal casing, and the third and fourth pictures are the sides of the PCB metal casing with the ports coming out of it. Now you'll notice that there are numbers assigned to different parts of the images, and I'll explain what those numbers are shortly here when we go over the PCB specifications. So the PCB specifications are as follows. The PC board model is a GBX 828-V01 board. The PC chipset in this is a Rockchip RK3032 chipset. The video connection that connects to the PCB to the monitor, it's an LVDS 2-channel 8-bit 30-pin connection. And the resolution output of this PCB is 1280 by 960, and that's a fixed resolution. Now we'll go ahead and talk about the ports that are on the board. Now you'll notice how I listed this. Each port is assigned a number, and over to the left where the images are, you'll see the number that corresponds with each port. So port number 1 is the 30-pin LVDS port, and that is where the 30-pin black connector plugs in, and then the other end would plug into the monitor. Number 2 is the inverter power port, and that's where the inverter power plugs in to the PCB. Number 3 is an SD card slot. It's unknown at this time what that SD card slot is for, but some indications A1UP has made state that that is for firmware updates. Port 4 is the light up marquee power port, where your light up marquee plugs in. Number 5 is the 3.5mm audio jack, where your speakers plug in. Number 6 is a USB port. Not sure if that's 2.0 or 3.0, but regardless, for the Partycade it's not used, but the USB port in some other Partycades like Street Fighter 2 and Defender, that USB port is used for controller for the second player. Number 7 is the micro USB port. The micro USB port is used for doing firmware updates, but it can also be used in some cases to plug in other devices, such as, for an example, for cabinets that have Wi-Fi and not a network connection. you can plug in a micro USB RJ45 port into that and then use a wired connection instead of Wi-Fi in some cases. Number 8 is the on-off firmware switch port, where a on-off switch is plugged into the PCB. Number 9 is the on-off firmware switch itself. You would switch this off and then follow the directions to perform a firmware update if available. Now number 10 is a port I'm not sure what that is. It's not used for anything as far as I can tell on the Super Pac-Man Partycade, and I'm unsure what that port is at this time. Number 11 is the 12 volt DC jack. Number 12 is the 12-pin ribbon cable port, and number 13 is the LVDS pin 1. Now this is important, and you can see it's pointing to pin 1. So when you plug your LVDS cable back into the PCB, you'll notice that there are a bunch of wires coming out of it, and 2 of those wires are red. Those indicate power cables, and those have to plug into the side where pin 1 is. If you reverse that and plug it in, you may damage your PCB or monitor or both. And then finally, is this PCB compatible with the Geekworm LVDS board? Geekworm is a LVDS to HDMI board that is used for Arcade 1UP PCBs to get bigger monitors connected to them. And normally the monitor that people go with is the Dell 20-inch 2007 FP monitor. So I've tested it with that monitor, and in both cases there's a generation 2 and generation 3 Geekworm board, and both of those boards do not work with this, and that doesn't surprise me, because with the Rockchip RK3032 board, whether it be the Dell 20-inch or any monitor that I've tried to connect up to that board, it does not work. For some reason, there's something with that Rockchip RK3032 chipset, but for some reason the Geekworm LVDS to HDMI boards do not work with this board. If you still want to use a bigger monitor, you can get a Dell 19-inch older monitor that's 1280 by 1024, and I'll leave a link in the description on a proof of concept of how to do that if you want to do that. But generally with the Partycades, people aren't really upgrading the monitors. It's more for the 3/4 scale Arcade 1UP monitor cabinets. But in case you want it, in case you're looking to upgrade the monitor, the link will be in the comments below. And in some cases, some people buy the Partycades to take the PCB and put it in a different machine. Will this PCB work in other 3/4 scale Arcade 1UPs? And the answer is yes. So if you have a cabinet that outputs 1280 by 960 and has the BOE monitor in it, then you should be able to move this PCB over just by itself and use the existing monitor. However, if you're using a generation 1 monitor that's 1280 by 1024, or if you have one of the machines that has the smaller 16.7-inch monitor which outputs 1024 by 768, you'll have to bring the PCB over and the monitor in order for it to work properly. So if you need to take the PCB out to put into another 3/4 scale Arcade 1UP cabinet, this is how you get the PCB out. So the first thing we need to do is you need to take the back off. So there's 5 screws that we need to take out. So we're just going to take our Phillips head screwdriver and proceed to take those screws out. The first screw is out of frame there, but again, just unscrew the 5 screws first to get the panel off. Okay, so we're going to get that final screw out of there, and the panel will pop off. And just so you know, I've already performed this, but you'll probably see some ties on the bottom there that tie the speaker cable and the power cable to the wood panel, and tape that's on the back of the monitor for the marquee. You'll have to take that tape off and clip off those ties in order to get to everything. So once you do that, then we're going to take these two screws off on the left and the right so that we can release that panel, and so that we can remove the cables from the back of the PCB. So we'll do it on this side and we'll do it on the other side as well. Okay, so once we get that screw out, the panel will drop. If you cut off all the ties and the tape, the panel will just drop down. So as you can see, it's being held in by the two dowels on both sides. So now we can unplug the marquee, unplug the power, and then unplug the 3.5mm speaker cable. And so once you have those unplugged, then we can remove the two screws that are holding the PCB into the back of the monitor. So just make sure you catch the screw, because once it comes out, sometimes it will drop and go all over the place. And so just put your hand there to hold, just to catch it when it comes out. Okay, so once you get that final screw out, there's going to be a screw in the back that's held in for the ground, so we're going to take that screw out of there as well. And once we get that screw out, then we can take the cables, unplug the cables that are plugged into the PCB so we can reach it. So we'll set that down. So there are three cables in here. We have the LVDS 30-pin cable, we have the inverter board, and then we have the 12-pin ribbon cable. So we're just going to pull those out. And once those are pulled out, that's it. We have access to the PCB, and you can move it over to another cabinet if you wish. So now we can talk a little bit about the software and the menu interface. One feature of this is when you turn the unit on, if you press player 1, player 2, and the A button simultaneously and keep it pressed in, that'll bring you to a debug mode. And once you're in that debug mode, if you press the player 1 button, it'll first go through a video check, then it'll go through a sound check, and after you get through that, then you'll go through a controller input test, so you can test all the buttons and the joystick and the volume switch. This is good if you plan on changing out controls and you forget where each button should go on the encoder board, and need to double check to make sure that all the controls are in the proper place. The menu interface is typical for an arcade 1UP cabinet. The graphics and color scheme reflect the marquee game that is on the cabinet. So to start a game, just move the joystick to select the game that you want, and it will be highlighted. Then you just press the A button to go into the game. That will bring you to the game control screen, which will show you what buttons are used in the game and how the joystick is used. And once you get a good look of how the controls are set up, then you just press the player 1 button to enter the game. Then to exit the game, just keep the player 1 button pressed in for 5 seconds and you'll return to the main menu. You'll have to do this in order to save high scores. If you just turn it off, your high score will not be saved. To change game settings, highlight the game that you want and then press the player 2 button, and you'll get a list of settings that you can alter for each game. And to go out and save the settings, press the A button and the settings will be saved. So if the machine is left on and there's no activity, the unit will go into the game that is selected. So in the left hand corner, you'll notice that there's a timer. So if there's no activity during this time, at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds, it will go into the game controls menu. And after that, after another 3 minutes and 20 seconds, if there's no activity, it will go into the game itself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fast forward to that close to 3 minutes and 20 seconds to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're at the 3:13 mark. So in a few seconds, it'll go to the game controls menu. And there we go. And in another 3 minutes and 20 seconds, it should go into the actual game, and we'll fast forward to that point. Okay, so we're about the 6 minute 40 second mark, so it should go into the game here momentarily. And there you go. As you can see, it's gone into the game. Now, this isn't on a track mode. This actually goes into the game. So if I move the joystick around, it's not going to exit. I'm actually in the game. So to get back to the main menu, I would have to press the player 1 button for 5 seconds to exit the game and get back to the main menu to select a new game. So the game lists on the Partycades have increased since their inception. The Partycades had started out with 3 games and 4 games, and then to 8 games, to now where the Super Pac-Man Partycade has 10 games. The game list provided on this unit is very diverse. The games include the following: the marquee games Super Pac-Man, Pac-Man, Pac-Mania, Pac-Land, Mappy, Dig Dug, Dig Dug 2, Rompers, Rolling Thunder, and New Rally X. Now, one game that is not on here that some people may be upset about is it doesn't include Galaga. But the reason why that's not included on this is because Arcade 1UP has a Partycade that specifically the marquee game is Galaga with 9 other games on that. So that would be the reason why you don't see that here. Sometime in the future, I plan to do a similar video for the Galaga Partycade, as I'm doing with the Super Pac-Man Partycade. 3 of these games in this list have a horizontal orientation and not vertical. Games are Pac-Land, Rolling Thunder, and New Rally X. When you play any of these games, you'll notice that there is a black border on the top and the bottom of the gameplay screen. This results in an active area for the gameplay of 12.875 inches in diagonally. So although the control panel has a number of action buttons, most of the games do not use all those buttons. So if you look in this picture here, you'll see above is the control panel and below is a grid indicating which games use which buttons and if they use joystick left, right, or joystick up, down. So as you can see, with the exception of Pac-Man, every game is going to use that G1C or the A button. But you'll also notice that G1-B, only Super Pac-Man and Pac-Mania use that button. And you'll also notice that G1Y and G1A, only a few games use those buttons as well, which would be Pac-Land, Dig Dug 2, and Rolling Thunder. Now the reason why I provide this grid showing you what's mapped to what is for modding purposes. Now for Super Pac-Man and Pac-Man, it's not necessarily a big deal. You're not really going to change the button scheme around, but for something like Defender Partycade, which has a unique control panel. So in the case of like Defender, if you wanted to create like a new control panel with just a joystick and 5 buttons, not necessarily in the Defender format, you at least know what all the buttons do and where they're plugged in in the encoder board. Now again, you may never use this. Personally, I would use this because I have a modded cabinet where I've allowed it to use hot swappable control panels. So for me, this becomes important. But it's just here for your general information in case you decide you need to know what button's being used for what game and where it's plugged into the encoder. So the next clip that I'm about to show you will show gameplay from all 10 games. It'll also show some game information, the control panel layout for each game, and also contain a section with the game setting options that you can set for each game. Now as far as gameplay for each game, as far as using the controls, as I stated before when we went over the control panel, the controls and the buttons are fine for these games. I've tested all the games and they operate just fine as you would expect. Again, it's going to depend on what you think of the controls for the Arcade 1UP. If you think they're mediocre, then you would want to replace them. But to me, the controls work fine. I have little minor issues with them, but that doesn't prevent the experience of the games itself. All games play well, and I've had no issues using the Arcade 1UP stock controllers. Now the video for the gameplay I had to capture on camera because there's not a video capture device that's compatible with the PCB for this particular unit, but I was able to capture the sound. And you'll notice on some of the sound samples that you may hear some ticking or clicking. I tried to clean this up as best as I could because when I captured the audio from the device, there was a lot of clicking in the audio, so I had to clean that up, but some of it resided. And I just wanted to let you know that that is in no way what you will hear when you do actual gameplay on the cabinet. It's just only from when I captured the sound from the unit. So with that said, I will go ahead and start the clip. So finally, we're going to talk about moving the components of a Partycade over to a 3/4 scale arcade 1-up. Now the Partycades are a 3-in-1 design, so they can either be set up to hang on the wall, they can be set up to hang on a door, or they can be set up to be put on a tabletop. However, there is a fourth option, and that is moving the components from the Partycade into an arcade 1-up 3/4 scale cabinet. Now the reason for doing this is because some of the early generation cabinets only had either 2 games or 4 games or even 7 games, and those games weren't really varied. So with a Partycade, in this case the Super Pac-Man, it has a diverse lineup, so people will take that PCB and put it into an older 3/4 Partycade to get more games. And with the Partycades right now, as of this video, they're about $220. It's a cheap way to get the components necessary to upgrade those older cabinets to more updated software and more games. So for the rest of this video, we're going to talk about transferring the components over to different 3/4 scale cabinets. Now, Arcade 1UP has produced a number of 3/4 scale Pac-Man cabinets. In total, there's a number of 6 Arcade 1UP 3/4 scale cabinets that are Pac-Man or Pac-Man themed. And I'll go over what is needed to transfer the components over to these cabinets and kind of some suggestions on what you need to do to perform that action. So on the screen you see a graphic. The first side is what's being transferred, and that in this case is going to be the Partycade, and then on the right of that is what's the cabinet's going to transfer to, and then over on the right of that you have the games that you're going to gain by doing the transfer, and the games that are going to be lost by doing the transfer, and then down below that what you're going to need to do in order to get the components transferred and to play the new PCB successfully. Now, most of these cabinets I do not own, but I've done research and have gotten as much information as I could from them. But in particular, it's the monitor that I'm concerned about on some of these. So for most of them, I know what the monitor is. However, I could be wrong as I don't own these cabinets. So as far as the monitor model goes, make sure on the cabinet that you're transferring it to, open the back of the cabinet and look at the model of the LCD display or the monitor. If the model monitor is BOE DV170YGZ-N10, then you do not have to bring over the monitor. However, if it's any type of monitor other than that, then you will have to bring the monitor over from the Pac-Man Partycade to whatever 3/4 scale RK1UP cabinet you're going to transfer it to. So let's begin with the first machine, which is the first generation Pac-Man machine. This was the first one of the first machines that Arcade1UP came out with. So as you can see, the difference between them, it has a different monitor model, whereas the Partycade is 1280 by 960. The Generation 1 Pac-Man has 1280 by 1024 resolution. And as you can see, the game list, where the Partycade has 10 games, the first generation Pac-Man only had 2 games, which was Pac-Man and Pac-Man Plus. So as you can see, you're going to gain a number of games if you perform this transfer. For a total of 9 games, new games that you'll get in this cabinet. The only game that you're going to lose is Pac-Man Plus. Now, because this is a Generation 1 cabinet, you're going to have to do a little bit more to get everything over. So, for example, you're going to have to transfer the monitor, you're going to have to transfer the PCB, and transfer the encoder from the Partycade. And you're going to have to drill a minimum of 3 action buttons into your control panel, with the G1B button being optional. So what I mean by that, if you look at the control panel layout for both of them, if you look at the Partycade one, you have 4 action buttons. And the G1B, the lettering is where it's plugged into the encoder board. So as you can see in the Generation 1 Pac-Man, there were no action buttons because there's just 2 Pac-Man games. So you're going to have to at least drill button holes in your control panel to at least get 3 of those action buttons in there. The 4th action button, which is G1B, which is the one on the left, you don't necessarily need that. The G1-B button is only used for 2 games. It's used for Super Pac-Man for super speed, and it's used for Pac-Mania for bounce. However, the G1C button, or the A button, which is the main button used in the Arcade1UP cabinets, that button performs the same function. So that's why I say you can get away with just 3 action buttons, because G1C does the same thing as G1B. So you can avoid doing another button hole for G1B. Now, if you want that button for those 3 games, and if you want it on the left side, if you're used to playing it, then you would drill an additional button for 4. But in this case, you'd only need 3, at minimum 3 buttons for the action buttons for this for the Super Pac-Man Partycade. And if you feel uncomfortable drilling holes into the control panel, you can always buy a control panel from a third party that already has the holes pre-drilled for you. And then you'd also need to transfer the volume switch. Now that's optional. The volume switch for the Partycade is a monetary switch, and the Generation 1 has 3 selections. So you turn it off, you do it midway, and you do high. Now you can still use this volume switch. So what would happen is when you're setting the volume, you would leave the volume switch in the middle, and then if you want to lower the volume, you would click it to the left, and then when you got adjusted to where you want to, put it back in the middle. And the same thing, increasing the volume. If you move it to the right, keep it going until you get to the level you want to, and then put it back in the middle. But if you want to, you can transfer that volume switch that's from the Partycade over. And you'll probably also have to bring over the dual speakers. Since this has only got a single speaker in there, you're going to need dual speakers, as that's what the Partycade uses, and on the PCB it doesn't have a port to where you can plug in a single speaker. So the next cabinet we'll look at is the Pac-Man 4-in-1, which was released by QVC, and of course it has 4 games on it instead of the 2. Now on this cabinet, I've never looked at this cabinet before, so I'm not sure what the monitor model or the monitor resolution is. So again, this is the case where you would, on the 4-in-1, open up the back, look at the model. If it matches the model that's on the Partycade, then you don't have to bring that monitor over. If it does not match, you will have to bring the monitor over. So in this case, games gained, you have 8 games gained, whereas the games lost that you're going to lose are Pac-Man Plus and Pac-and-Pal. And again, there's some questions, work that needs to be done. Again, questioning the transfer of the monitor. Again, once you check the model number of the 4-in-1, then you can determine if you have to bring the monitor over. Of course, you're going to bring over the PCB, the encoder. Now, this already has one action button on there, so you would only have to drill 2 action buttons. But again, if you wanted that G1-B button, which is over to the left, you could drill that as well. So that you have, that one button on the left so it matches the Partycade configuration. But again, you don't need it if you don't want to drill it. And then the transfer of the volume switch, again, that's questionable, because again, I don't know if the 4-in-1 had a monetary switch or if it had to switch like the Generation 1. And then finally, you would transfer to dual speakers again, because this only has a mono speaker on it. Now the third cabinet we're going to look at is a Super Pac-Man, which is the Costco edition. Now this is kind of unique, as the Costco Super Pac-Man originally came with the monitor that was 16.7 inches, which is the one that starts with M167XG, and that resolution on that monitor was 1024 by 768. However, recently, back in July, I think it was July or August of 2021, they started re-releasing these in Costco, and those models have the BOE DV170 YGZ-N10 model monitor in there. So if you're going to do this to a Super Pac-Man, you would need to make sure that definitely check the monitor that's in there, because more than likely it's going to be that 1024 by 768 monitor, and you'll have to bring the monitor over. Now the Super Pac-Man had 7 games instead of 10. So the games that you're going to gain on this one are Mappy, Dig Dug 2, Rompers, Rolling Thunder, and New Rally X. But the games lost are going to be Galaga and Galaxian, which those games are pretty much big hits to lose because they're so well thought of. So you'll have to think if you really want to lose Galaga or Galaxian on the cabinet. Now, on the control panel itself, or the stuff that you're going to have to bring over, you'll have to transfer over the PCB, you'll have to transfer over the encoder, and you'll have to drill at least 1 additional hole. Now, you may want to drill more than that, because as you can see on the Super Pac-Man control panel, you have 2 action buttons on the left and 1 on the right. So if you want it to match the same layout as the Partycade, you would drill 2 holes on the right, and then just leave and then just use the one on the left, and just leave the other button alone. Or if you're okay with all the buttons being on the left, then you just need to drill 1 hole on the left, and just plug those in to the correct ports on the encoder so that the buttons line up the same way. Again, it's up to you how you'd want to do it, but if you don't mind having all the buttons to the left and the one on the right, then just 1 hole. You have to drill. If you want all 3 of the buttons on the right and 1 on the left to match the Partycade, then you'd have to drill 2 holes on the right, and then that white button wouldn't be connected to anything. It would just be dead. So You'll also need to transfer the monitor if the monitor is the model that is the twin 1024 by 768. Now again, if it's the newer Super Pac-Man, it'll probably have the BOE monitor in there, and if it does, you don't have to transfer over the monitor. Okay, so the next cabinet we're going to look at is the Pac-Man Plus that was released by QVC, and this is an 8-in-1 which has 8 games. The games that you're going to gain from this by swapping it out, you're going to get Mappy, Dig Dug 2, Rompers, Rolling Thunder, and New Rally X. But you're going to lose Pac-Man Plus, Pac and Pal, and again, you're going to lose Galaga. So for this one, these are starting to get into the newer cabinets, which have the newer monitors, so there's less to bring over. So for this one, you just transfer over the PCB and the encoder. And you would only drill one additional hole if you really want that G1B button, which is on the left. Now, if you don't care about that button, remember that button is only used for 2 games, and that's Super Pac-Man and Pac-Mania. But the G1C button does the same function. So in this case, if you don't need that G1B button on the left, you don't have to drill any additional buttonholes on this particular cabinet. The 3 buttons will work fine. Just plug them up into the appropriate ports on the encoder that are shown on the right action buttons, and you're good to go. So there's nothing. So the only thing on this cabinet you'd have to transfer would be the PCB and the encoder. So the next cabinet we're going to look at is the Pac-Man 40th anniversary. So again, this is a newer cabinet. It's pretty much got the same control panel layout as the Pac-Man Plus, which was an 8-in-1. But again, the games that you're going to gain are Mappy, Dig Dug 2, Rompers, Rolling Thunder, and New Rally X. The games that you're going to lose, again, are Pac-Man Plus, Pac and Pal, and Galaga. And just like with the Pac-Man Plus 8-in-1, the only thing you need to transfer over are the PCB and the encoder. And you can drill one additional hole for that G1B button, but that's optional. Because again, that button is only used for 2 games, and the G1C button does the same thing in those games. So if you don't want to go through the work of trying to drill another button on the left, then the PCB and the encoder is the only thing you need to transfer over. Also, this will fix a few problems with the Pac-Man 40th as well. And this goes for the, I believe, the Pac-Man Plus 8-in-1. So by doing this, even though you're going to lose Galaga on both of those, you're going to gain a few things. One, you're going to gain the ability to go into game settings on these games. So you can turn off the pixel smoothing and things of that nature. But on the Pac-Man 40th, it should fix the sound issue. If the sound issue was a problem with the PCB setting on the Pac-Man 40th anniversary, then putting this PCB in there to replace that would fix that issue. So it's just something to think about. Now, I know these games, losing Galaga is a big thing, and that may be the biggest thing that will stop people from transferring this over, doing this transfer, is because they'll lose Galaga. But again, if you want to get the game settings to where you can alter them and to fix the sound issue, this may be the way to go. And finally, we'll look at the Pac-Man Namco Legacy. Now, this is probably one that you're not going to transfer over, as the Partycade has 10 games, whereas the Legacy has 12 games. But I thought I'd throw it out there anyway to show you. So the games that you're going to gain by doing this is Rolling Thunder and New Rally X, where in the games lost, it's going to be more. You're going to lose Galaga, Galaxian, Pac-Man Plus, and Pac and Pal. And again, just like with the Pac-Man 40th and the Pac-Man Plus, you just need to bring over the PCB and the encoder. And if you want to have that G1B button on the right, you just have to drill another button. But again, it's not needed, as I've explained in the other 2 segments. So that ends the video for this comprehensive breakdown of the Super Pac-Man Partycade. I really like the machine. It's really a good looking machine. The marquee looks great in my opinion. It's not washed out. It sounds great with the speakers. It was a little bit muffled, but I think that was more of just the audio for that video clip, as other games that I tested seemed to work fine. It has a nice diverse selection of games, unlike previous 3/4 scale cabinets, which are Pac-Man, which focused a lot on Pac-Man, where you'd get like 6 or 7 different Pac-Man games. This one is kind of tame. It's got a few Pac-Man games, but it's also got a lot of other diverse games and some games that haven't really showed up on any of the Arcade 1UP 3/4 scale cabinets as well. The controls are typical for Arcade 1UP, but they do the job just fine. I have a small little issues with them, but those are more of a personal preference. Again, you may believe that the joysticks and buttons are fine, and they are. It's just a matter, again, it's a matter of preference, whether you think you want to get better joysticks or buttons and put them in the machine. So originally the unit can be used. You can put it on a tabletop, you can hang it on a wall, or you can hang it on the door. However, the fourth option is you can let some people like to just take the components out of here and put them in a different cab, because the Partycade is inexpensive, so it's a cheap way to upgrade maybe a Generation 1 cab or one of the other Pac-Man cabs for that matter. And we went through that. However, I also added that for some of the cabs that have Galaga, you would lose that game. So whether you keep the cabinet stock or whether you decide to transfer the components to a different cabinet, overall it's a great machine. I really like the look of the Super Pac-Man, particularly when the 3/4 scale one came out and I missed out on it. So I'm glad that I got this Super Pac-Man Partycade, as it satisfies my need to have that cabinet without having to pay the extra cost of getting a 3/4 scale cabinet. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If there's anything I missed or anything you have questions about, you can hit me up in the comments below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.